They killed Caesar to save the Roman Republic, a republic that had existed for 500 years and had never had a king. They called themselves the Liberators, heroes who were saving Rome from the hands of an ambitious dictator. But they did not know that this very act of assassination would kill the Republic forever and pave the way for the empire. Rome, 44 years before the Common Era, the most powerful city in the world, stood at a fateful turning point. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world at that time, had just been appointed dictator for life of Rome. For 500 years, Rome had no king. Power was shared among senators in the Senate. But now things were different. Caesar held everything in his hands, and many began to believe he wanted to become king. Among those who feared this were 60 senators. They secretly met and decided that they must act immediately. The 15th of March, 44 years before the Common Era, a day the Romans called the Ides of March. Early that morning, Caesar prepared to go to the Senate for a meeting, just like any other ordinary day in his life. His wife, Calpurnia, begged him to stay home. She had just dreamed of bad omens and sensed that something terrible was about to happen. But Caesar was a man who knew no fear. He dismissed all warnings and walked out of his house for the last time in his life. 60 senators had been waiting inside the Senate beforehand, hands hiding daggers under their cloaks, hearts pounding with fear. And among those conspirators was a man whom Caesar loved like his own son. His name was Brutus. Brutus had once sided with Pompey against Caesar in the previous civil war, and he should have been executed. But Caesar had spared Brutus's life. Not only spared him, but also gave him high office and trusted him absolutely. Cassius, Brutus's brother-in-law, was the same. He had also sided with the enemy and was also spared and promoted after the civil war. Caesar entered the Senate and sat down on the golden chair reserved for the dictator for life of mighty Rome. A senator approached Caesar, pretending to want to ask him something, then suddenly grabbed hold of his cloak. That was the prearranged signal. 60 daggers were simultaneously drawn, and they lunged at Caesar. 23 stab wounds, 23 wounds on the body of the most powerful dictator that Rome had ever witnessed. And in that frenzied stabbing crowd, Caesar saw the face of Brutus, the man he considered his own son. According to the historian Plutarch, Caesar cried out in Greek, "You too, my child," before collapsing and breathing his last. He fell at the foot of Pompey's statue, his old enemy whom he had defeated, as if fate deliberately staged a bitter drama. The assassins shouted loudly in the Senate, with voices full of pride, "Freedom, the tyrant is dead, the Republic is saved." They called themselves Liberators, meaning the Liberators, heroes who were saving Rome from tyranny. They firmly believed that killing Caesar was the most righteous deed, the only way to save the 500-year-old Republic. But were they right? And where would Rome go after the bloody death of this most powerful dictator? Rome fell into chaos immediately after the assassination occurred. No one knew what would happen next to the country. Mark Antony, Caesar's closest friend, and also his best general, had escaped death by a hair's breadth. Brutus ordered that Antony must not be killed. He believed that killing Caesar alone was enough. That was the first mistake in Brutus's chain of mistakes, and Antony would make them pay dearly for this decision. At Caesar's funeral, Antony stepped up to the podium and delivered a speech that would become legendary. He did not directly accuse the assassins, but his clever words made the people boil with hatred. The Roman crowd, from supporting the liberators, suddenly turned to hate them with mad fury. They burned down the houses of the assassins, chased them through the streets, and chanted Caesar's name in mourning. Brutus and Cassius were forced to flee Rome, their dream of heroism shattered in just a few short days. And then a new figure suddenly appeared on Rome's political stage, an 18-year-old young man named Octavian. Octavian was Caesar's biological nephew, and also his adopted son, according to the will he left before his death. Caesar's will clearly declared that Octavian was the sole heir, receiving his name and all his property. This young man wanted to avenge his adoptive father, and more importantly, wanted to seize power for himself. At first, Antony and Octavian opposed and were hostile to each other because both wanted to become Caesar's successor. But then they realized that their greatest common enemy was Brutus and Cassius, who were gathering forces in the east. The 27th of November, 43 years before the Common Era, a new law was passed in Rome. The Lex Titia officially established the Second Triumvirate, an alliance of 3 men holding absolute power together. Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, these 3 men now held the entire fate of Rome in their hands. They had power equivalent to a dictator for 5 years, able to do anything without anyone daring to oppose them. And the first thing they did was create a proscription list. More than 300 senators and nobles were marked for death. Cicero, the orator considered the greatest in Roman history, was also on that list and was beheaded. The Triumvirate mobilized 28 legions, estimated at about 100,000 of the finest soldiers. In the east, Brutus and Cassius were not sitting idle either. They also gathered 17 to 19 legions. The total forces of both sides could reach up to 200,000 people, one of the largest civil wars in history. 200,000 Romans preparing to kill each other, not because of foreign invasion, but only for power struggle. Brutus and Cassius controlled almost the entire eastern part of the empire, from Greece all the way to Syria and Asia Minor. They had a powerful fleet controlling the Mediterranean Sea, fully capable of cutting off the enemy's supply lines. Philippi, a city located in the region of Macedonia, now in northern Greece, would be the place to decide everyone's fate. The ancients often called this place the gateway between Europe and Asia, a position of extremely great strategic importance. The terrain at Philippi was very special, a narrow plain lying between high mountains to the north and vast marshlands to the south. Brutus and Cassius quickly seized 2 hills, building strong fortifications, blocking the Via Egnatia road. Their strategy was extremely simple: defend, wait, and let the enemy army starve to death from lack of supplies. Antony arrived first with his vanguard army. He camped only 1.5 kilometers from the enemy position. Octavian arrived later because he was seriously ill throughout the long march, an illness no one could determine the cause of. Antony repeatedly tried to provoke, looking for every way to lure Brutus and Cassius down to the plain to fight. But the 2 of them did not fall for Antony's trap. They knew that the longer time dragged on, the more it favored them. Antony's biggest problem was that his army was too far from supply sources, while the enemy fleet blocked the sea routes. If they continued to do nothing, the Triumvirate's army would starve before they could fight a single battle. And this was when Antony proved why he was considered one of the greatest generals of his era. He ordered his soldiers to secretly build a causeway through the marshland to the south, aiming to outflank the enemy. For 10 continuous days and nights, thousands of soldiers carried earth and stones, built pontoon bridges, working in absolute silence. The ultimate goal of this plan was to go around behind the enemy, cutting off their supply line from the port of Neapolis. Cassius discovered this bold plan and immediately had a wall built to block Antony's causeway. By this point, both sides could no longer avoid confrontation. Battle was now only a matter of time. The 3rd of October, 42 years before the Common Era, the First Battle of Philippi officially began. Antony suddenly ordered a direct attack on the defensive line that Cassius was defending in the south. At the same time, Brutus's troops in the north saw this and spontaneously charged to attack Octavian's army. Actually, no one had ordered them to do so. The soldiers acted on their own initiative, and both sides lost control. A chaotic battle began. Poor discipline, weak command, no one knew exactly what was happening. On the northern part of the battlefield, Brutus's troops attacked extremely fiercely and completely tore apart Octavian's line. They poured into Octavian's camp like a broken dam, looting everything. 3 legions lost their eagle standards. Losing eagle standards was a sign of complete defeat and disgrace in the Roman army, a stain very difficult to wash away. But when searching throughout Octavian's tent, they could not find him anywhere in the camp. It turned out that Octavian, the man who would later become the greatest emperor Augustus, was hiding in the marshes. He was so seriously ill that he could not command, and when the camp was attacked, he had to flee. Just imagine, the most powerful emperor in Roman history now lying in cold mud to hide from the enemy. But on the southern part of the battlefield, the situation was completely opposite. Antony was completely crushing Cassius's forces. Antony's troops broke through the enemy line, poured into the camp. Cassius was forced to retreat upward. Cassius ran up to a nearby high hill to observe the entire battlefield and find a way to turn the situation around. But thick dust from the battle obscured his vision. He could not see what was happening on Brutus's side. He immediately sent Titinius, his closest friend, to ride and scout and bring news back to him. Titinius rode his horse toward Brutus's camp in the north, where the battle was still raging fiercely. From afar, Cassius saw a large group of cavalry surrounding Titinius. He thought his friend had been captured, but the truth was completely opposite to what he saw. Those were Brutus's cavalry celebrating victory. Cassius had absolutely no idea that Brutus had won a great victory, that Octavian's forces had been routed. He thought everything was over, that both sides had lost the battle, that there was no hope left. And in that most desperate moment of his life, Cassius made a decision that would completely change Roman history. He ordered his slave Pindarus to kill him immediately, and not with just any sword, but with the very dagger he had used to stab Caesar 2 years earlier, a truly cruel irony. Just minutes after Cassius died, Titinius returned with news of resounding victory, but everything was too late. Cassius was already dead, the most talented general of the liberator side, dead because of completely wrong information. Titinius placed the victory laurel wreath on Cassius's corpse, then drew his sword and stabbed himself to death. When Brutus received this terrible news, he was completely stunned. His closest comrade was no longer there. He stood before Cassius's body and spoke a sentence that historian Plutarch recorded, "You are the last of the Romans." That statement carried a profound meaning, as if Brutus had already known that the Republic had died with Cassius. Militarily, the battle on October 3rd ended with a draw. Neither side won clearly. Brutus completely defeated Octavian in the north, while Antony defeated Cassius in the south. But Brutus had lost his most important ally, the best strategist in his faction. 20 long days passed after the first battle. Both sides tried to recover and calculate their next moves. Brutus still had significant advantages. He held the high ground, and the supply route from the sea remained open. The wisest strategy at this point was to continue waiting, to let the enemy army slowly starve from lack of supplies. But Brutus was not a brilliant strategist like Cassius. He was essentially a philosopher and an orator. In the nights that followed, Brutus could not sleep. He sat reading books alone in his tent, the candle flickering dimly. And according to historian Plutarch's records, one late night while reading, Brutus suddenly saw a strange figure, a huge and terrifying shape, standing silently right beside him in the flickering dim candlelight. Brutus asked the ghost, "Are you God, demon, or who that makes me shiver and my hair stand on end like this?" The ghost replied in a cold voice, "I am your evil spirit, Brutus, and you shall see me again at Philippi." Brutus, a stoic philosopher who did not fear death, calmly replied, "Then I shall see you there." The ghost slowly disappeared into the darkness, and Brutus then knew that his fate had been decided. In the following days after that, the situation began to deteriorate rapidly for Brutus despite his advantages. Allied troops from the eastern regions began deserting in droves. They were tired and just wanted to end the war. Soldiers under Brutus also became restless and anxious. They did not want to wait anymore, they wanted to fight and go home. Antony, meanwhile, continued building fortifications, step by step outflanking, threatening to cut off Brutus's supply line. If Antony completed this plan, Brutus would be completely isolated with no way to retreat. Brutus was forced to make a difficult choice, either attack now or wait until being completely surrounded. He lamented to his generals, "I am fighting like Pompey did in old days, not commanding but being commanded." The 23rd of October, 42 years before the Common Era, the Second Battle of Philippi officially began. That late afternoon, Brutus ordered a total attack across the entire front, betting everything on one decisive battle. Brutus's cavalry attacked fiercely on the left flank and initially pushed back Octavian's forces quite far. At first everything seemed to be going well. Brutus's troops advanced and seemed to gain the upper hand on the battlefield. But the infantry on the right flank could not keep up with the advance. The formation began to scatter, revealing fatal weaknesses. Antony quickly recognized the opportunity. He concentrated all his forces to strike directly at Brutus's weak right flank. Antony's troops easily tore through the enemy formation. Brutus's infantry collapsed. Soldiers fled in disorder. Antony immediately proceeded to outflank and completely cut off the retreat route. Brutus fell into encirclement from all sides. Brutus, with his remaining remnant troops, tried to retreat into the mountains, seeking to escape the ever-tightening encirclement. From 17 to 19 powerful legions at the start, now fewer than 4 legions remained with him. Night fell. Brutus summoned his remaining generals for a meeting in a small tent on the cold mountainside. He asked everyone, "Is there anyone among you who still wants to continue fighting? Does anyone still see any hope?" The generals all remained silent, saying nothing. No one dared to answer because they knew everything was already over. Brutus understood everything without anyone needing to say it. He clearly knew that this was his end. He said farewell to his remaining loyal friends, those who had followed him to fight until the very last moment. Then he asked Strato, his most faithful friend, to hold the sword firmly with both hands and keep it straight. Brutus threw himself onto the cold, sharp blade, ending his life as a true Stoic philosopher would. With Brutus's death, the Liberator faction officially ended completely. There was no longer anyone to lead. The next morning, Antony led his troops to search and found Brutus's body lying on the cold mountainside. He stood stunned for a long while before the corpse of his enemy, the man who had killed his ally's adoptive father. But Antony did not curse or insult. Instead, he ordered that a purple cloak be brought. He respectfully draped the noble cloak over Brutus's body, a gesture full of respect for a worthy enemy. Though standing on opposite battle lines, Antony still acknowledged that Brutus was a noble Roman. The Battle of Philippi ended with the complete and absolute victory of the Triumvirate. Caesar's side had finally won. Antony was the true hero of this battle. He had personally commanded and won a glorious victory. But Antony was not the final winner of this story. History still had one more chapter. 11 years later, in 31 years before the Common Era, another great naval battle took place. At Actium, the mighty fleet of Antony and Cleopatra was completely defeated by Octavian's fleet. Antony and Cleopatra both committed suicide, ending the life of the talented general in a tragic manner. And Octavian, the weak man who had once hidden in the marshes at Philippi, now became the sole master of Rome. He changed his name to Augustus, becoming the first emperor of Rome, and ruled the country for 40 years. The Roman Republic, after 500 years of existence and development, officially ended on the bloody field at Philippi. Brutus and Cassius wanted to save the Republic by killing Caesar, but they themselves had inadvertently killed it. They called themselves the Liberators, but history calls them the ones who unwittingly paved the way for the